Welcome back to Hopeful Horizon, where we share stories that inspire, challenge, and ignite conversations that matter. Today's story is about resilience, unity, and the fight against prejudice. It follows the Outcast Riders, a diverse biker gang doing incredible charity work in their community. But their efforts are overshadowed by relentless police harassment, led by a police chief with a dark agenda. Just when things seem impossible, a shocking revelation turns everything on its head and forces the town to face the truth about bias and injustice. Stay with us as we take you on a thrilling ride through a story of defiance, courage, and a twist you won't see coming. If you're a fan of stories packed with unexpected twists and powerful moments of truth, make sure to comment below, subscribe, and hit that bell so you never miss an inspiring story from Hopeful Horizon. And let us know where you're tuning in from. The roar of engines filled the quiet streets of Riverton as the Outcast Riders, a tight-knit biker gang, cruised down Main Street. They weren't just any group of bikers. Their leather vests carried patches not only of rebellion, but of unity. Their members were a mix of Black, Latino, Asian, and white riders, bonded by shared experiences of hardship and resilience. For years, they had worked to improve their community, hosting charity events, raising funds for local schools, and cleaning up neglected areas. But no matter how many lives they touched, the stigma of being bikers, especially diverse ones, clung to them like a shadow. As they pulled up to a small neighborhood park to distribute meals to the homeless, the local kids ran up, waving excitedly. Luis, one of the riders, hopped off his bike and gave a high five to a little boy. "Hey Johnny, you ready for some hot dogs?" The boy giggled and nodded eagerly. The Outcast Riders had become a lifeline for families struggling in the working-class community. But while the people loved them, others watched with suspicion, especially the Riverton Police Department. From across the street, Police Chief Raymond Garrick sat in his cruiser, watching the gang with cold, narrowed eyes. Known for his strong-arm tactics and racial prejudice, Garrick had made it no secret that he wanted the Outcast Riders gone. He hated the sight of them. Bikers, especially ones who weren't white, gathering peacefully and earning the respect of the community. "They're nothing but criminals hiding behind charity," Garrick muttered to his partner, Officer Henderson. "We're going to take them down, mark my words." The chief had a plan. He was going to frame the riders, claiming they were running drugs through their events under the guise of helping people. He knew he couldn't just bust them without cause, so he waited for the right moment, building his case, twisting the law to fit his agenda. But what Garrick didn't know was that his own son, Jason, was riding with the outcasts. Jason had kept his membership a secret, knowing his father would never understand. The riders were his family. They gave him a sense of belonging he never felt growing up in the shadow of his father's bigotry. The next morning, the Outcast Riders met at their clubhouse, a small garage on the edge of town. Tasha, the gang's unofficial leader, stood at the head of the group. A black woman with a fierce heart and a reputation for standing up against injustice, Tasha had brought together the gang's diverse members, uniting them with a shared mission of community service. "We've got the charity event coming up next week," she announced. "We need to be ready for anything. Chief Garrick is looking for any excuse to shut us down, so make sure everything is by the book." Jason, sitting toward the back, shifted uncomfortably. He knew his father was planning something, but he couldn't bring himself to tell the others. He loved the riders, but the weight of his secret was becoming harder to bear. Every time his father's name came up in conversation, guilt gnawed at him. Meanwhile, tension in the town was growing. Flyers for the upcoming charity event were plastered all over Riverton, with the Outcast Riders' name front and center. The police chief had been spreading rumors, telling the media that the riders were under investigation for potential drug trafficking. As the event drew closer, Garrick ramped up his intimidation tactics. Police cruisers began tailing the riders whenever they were on the road. Officers would show up at their events, waiting for someone to slip up, hoping for an excuse to arrest them. The riders kept their heads down, but the pressure was starting to show. Luis, one of the younger members, was frustrated. "This is getting out of hand, Tasha," he said after another close encounter with the cops. "We're doing everything right, but they're just waiting for us to mess up. I can't take it anymore." Tasha placed a calming hand on his shoulder. "I know it's hard, Luis, but we can't give them what they want. We stay calm, we stay peaceful. That's how we win." But not everyone agreed. Some of the riders began to talk about fighting back, about showing the police they wouldn't be pushed around anymore. Jason, silent but listening, knew it was only a matter of time before something broke. The day of the charity event arrived, and the Outcast Riders were out in full force. The sun beat down on the small park where they had set up booths for food donations, medical checks, and games for the local kids. It should have been a day of joy and celebration, but a dark cloud loomed over the event. Police cruisers lined the street, officers standing nearby with crossed arms and judgmental glares. Chief Garrick stood at the edge of the park, watching the riders like a hawk, waiting for the moment to strike. As the event went on, tensions mounted. Every laugh, every cheer was met with stony silence from the police. It was clear to everyone there that this wasn't just another community event. This was a standoff. And then it happened. As Luis was handing out food, a shout came from the other side of the park. A young boy, no older than 12, had knocked over a trash can, spilling its contents. An officer rushed over, barking at the boy, who froze in fear. Tasha saw it first and moved quickly, stepping between the officer and the boy. "He's just a kid," she said, her voice calm but firm. "There's no need for this." The officer sneered. "You're all the same. Troublemakers, every last one of you." Tasha's eyes flashed with anger, but she held her ground. "We're not here to cause trouble. We're here to help." Before the situation could escalate further, Chief Garrick stepped forward, his eyes cold and calculating. "Help, huh?" he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "That's not what I've heard. I've heard you're running drugs through these events. Maybe I should take a closer look." The air was thick with tension. The entire park seemed to hold its breath as the chief's words hung in the air. Tasha knew this was it, the moment Garrick had been waiting for. He was going to make his move. But before anyone could react, Jason stepped forward, pulling off his helmet and revealing himself. "Dad, stop!" The entire crowd turned to look at him, shock rippling through the riders as they realized who he was. "What the hell are you doing, Jason?" Garrick spat, his face turning red with fury. "I'm one of them," Jason said, his voice steady. "I've been riding with the outcasts for months. They're not criminals. They're my family." The chief's face twisted with rage, but before he could say another word, the crowd began to murmur. The revelation had turned everything upside down. The entire park went silent as Jason's words hung in the air. His father, Chief Garrick, stared at him in disbelief, his face flushed with anger. The tension between them was palpable, and the weight of Jason's admission reverberated through the crowd. The Outcast Riders, shocked by the revelation, exchanged bewildered glances. Tasha stepped forward, eyes locked on Jason. "You've been one of us all along?" she asked, her voice low but steady. Jason nodded. "Yeah, I didn't want to hide it anymore. I joined because I believe in what we're doing. We help this community, something the cops refuse to see." Garrick's fists clenched as he shot a glare at his son. "You're a damn fool, Jason. You've thrown everything away for this? These people are criminals, and you've been brainwashed by them." Jason didn't flinch. "No, Dad, they're not criminals. You've been wrong about them all along, but you're too blinded by your own prejudice to see it." The crowd, previously quiet, began to stir with murmurs of agreement. Some of the townspeople, many of whom had benefited from the writers' charity work, stepped forward to show their support. "He's right," a woman in the front said. "The outcasts have done more for this community than you ever have." Chief Garrick's face grew redder as the words hit him. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not in front of his officers and the public. His anger boiled over. "Enough," he bellowed, turning his attention to the crowd. "These people are criminals, and I'll prove it. You're all being fooled by their charity act, but I'm going to put an end to this today." As Garrick motioned for his officers to move in, Jason stepped in front of Tasha and the other riders, blocking his father's path. "No, Dad, you're not going to do this." "Get out of the way, Jason," Garrick yelled, his voice hoarse with frustration, but Jason stood firm. "You've already crossed the line, and I'm not letting you drag this community down with your hate." Just as it seemed the standoff was about to erupt into violence, a voice rang out from the back of the crowd. "Enough is enough!" It was Ian, a local community leader who had quietly watched the entire scene unfold. Ian was well respected in the town, a man who had lived through the civil rights movement and had always been a calm, guiding presence. The crowd parted as Ian walked toward the front, his cane tapping rhythmically against the pavement. "Chief Garrick," Ian said, his voice steady but firm, "this town is better than this. We've seen enough hate and division. These riders have done nothing but help us, and it's time you recognize that." Garrick scoffed. "They're criminals, Ian. I'm trying to protect this town." Ian shook his head. "No, you're protecting your ego. You can't stand the idea that people of different races and backgrounds could come together and do something good. It doesn't fit your narrative, so you're trying to destroy it." The crowd erupted in murmurs of agreement, and more people stepped forward to show their support for the riders. Garrick looked around, realizing he was losing control of the situation. His officers exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of how to proceed. Tasha, seeing an opportunity to diffuse the tension, spoke up. "Chief, we're not your enemy. We're just trying to make this town a better place. We've done nothing wrong, and you know it. But if you want to search our clubhouse or our bikes, go ahead. We've got nothing to hide." Jason nodded in agreement. "This isn't about law and order anymore, Dad. This is about you needing to be right." For a moment, it seemed like Garrick might lash out again, but the pressure of the crowd's disapproval weighed heavily on him. He knew he was outnumbered, and the tide had turned against him. His face contorted in frustration, but he lowered his hand, signaling his officers to stand down. "I'll be watching you," Garrick spat, pointing a finger at Tasha and the riders. "This isn't over." Without another word, he stormed off, his officers following reluctantly behind. The crowd watched as the police cruisers disappeared down the road, leaving the park in stunned silence. With the police gone, the park was filled with an overwhelming sense of relief. Tasha let out a deep breath, feeling the weight of the confrontation lift. The riders gathered around her, offering words of support and solidarity. Jason, still standing by her side, looked out at the crowd that had rallied behind them. "Thank you," Tasha said, her voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you all for standing up for us." The townspeople, many of whom had always kept a cautious distance from the riders, now saw them in a new light. They weren't just bikers, they were protectors of the community. Their diverse backgrounds, once a target of suspicion, were now seen as a symbol of unity. Jason, still wrestling with the emotions of the day, turned to Tasha. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you about my dad earlier. I was afraid of how it would change things." Tasha smiled softly. "You don't have to apologize, Jason. You did the right thing today. Standing up to your father wasn't easy, but it took real courage." Jason nodded, but the weight of his father's betrayal still lingered. "I just wish things didn't have to end like this. I wanted him to see what we're really about." "He will eventually," Tasha said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Change takes time, but today was a start." As the crowd began to disperse, Ian approached Jason and Tasha. "You both did good today," he said with a nod of approval. "This town has needed a wake-up call for a long time, and I think you just gave it to them." Tasha smiled, but there was still a sadness in her eyes. "I just hope it's enough to make a real difference." In the days following the confrontation, the town of Riverton began to change. Word spread about what had happened at the charity event, and more people began to openly support the Outcast Riders. The local media picked up the story, and soon the riders were being recognized not as a gang, but as a force for good in the community. Chief Garrick, humiliated by the events, became increasingly isolated. His reputation suffered, and his authority was called into question. Some of the town's leaders began pushing for his resignation, while others called for a review of the police department's practices. Jason, now fully committed to the riders, found a new sense of purpose in helping the community. He and Tasha worked together to expand the gang's outreach efforts, partnering with local organizations to provide even more support to those in need. As for the town, Riverton was far from perfect, but the events of that day had sparked something, a conversation about justice, equality, and the need to break down barriers of prejudice. The riders, once seen as outcasts, had become a symbol of what was possible when people of all backgrounds came together for a common cause. And though the road ahead was still uncertain, one thing was clear. The Outcast Riders weren't just a gang. They were a movement. Months had passed since the tense showdown at the charity event, but its impact on the town of Riverton continued to ripple through the community. The Outcast Riders were no longer just a misunderstood biker gang. They had become a beacon of hope, a symbol of unity in diversity. Their once maligned reputation had been replaced by admiration from those who had seen the good they could do. Chief Garrick, however, was a shadow of his former self. The pressure from the community had forced him into early retirement. The once feared lawman had become a figure of controversy, his legacy tainted by the revelation of his racial prejudice and the hypocrisy exposed by his own son. The city council launched an investigation into the police department's conduct, which uncovered patterns of bias and abuse of power that stretched far beyond Garrick's tenure. Sweeping reforms were soon implemented, and Riverton's police department began to slowly rebuild trust with the citizens it had sworn to protect. Jason, now a prominent leader within the Outcast Riders, had found peace in embracing who he truly was. His relationship with his father remained fractured, but he no longer sought the elder Garrick's approval. He had forged his own path, one rooted in justice and community, surrounded by people who had become more than just fellow riders. They were family. Tasha, ever the guiding force behind the Riders, continued to lead with strength and compassion. She and Jason worked together to expand the club's charitable work, turning the Riders into a full-fledged community organization. They partnered with schools, churches, and local businesses, launching initiatives to help the homeless, mentor at-risk youth, and provide job training for those in need. Their work had transcended the label of biker gang, and they had earned a reputation as champions of the people. Riverton, though still grappling with its own history of division, had started to shift. Conversations about race and equality, once whispered behind closed doors, were now being held openly. Town hall meetings, once dominated by the same few voices, now welcomed people from all walks of life. The Riders had opened a door that couldn't be closed, and the town was better for it. Ian, the wise elder who had stood up to Chief Garrick that day, became a close advisor to Tasha and Jason. His quiet strength and years of experience helped guide the Riders through difficult decisions, reminding them to always keep their mission clear, to protect the vulnerable and fight for justice, no matter the cost. As for the Riders themselves, their numbers grew. People who had once feared them now wanted to be part of their movement. New recruits from all backgrounds joined their ranks, drawn not by the thrill of the ride, but by the shared purpose of making a difference. In the end, the Outcast Riders had not only survived, they had thrived. They had turned their struggle into a movement, their rejection into power. Riverton had been changed by their presence, and in doing so, the Riders had set an example for towns across the country. But despite their successes, the road ahead was still long. There would be new challenges, new enemies, and new battles to fight. But as Tasha often reminded them during their meetings, we've come this far because we stand together. As long as we do that, there's nothing we can't overcome. And so, the Outcast Riders rode on, not just as a gang, but as a symbol of resistance, of unity, and of the power that comes when people from all walks of life join together for a common cause. Their journey was far from over, but with every mile they rode, they knew they were leaving the world just a little better than they found it. Thank you for joining us on this powerful journey of resilience, unity, and standing up against injustice. The story of the Outcast Riders reminds us that even when the road is tough and the odds are stacked against us, standing together for what's right can lead to real change. It's about finding strength in community and having the courage to challenge prejudice, no matter how deep-rooted it may seem. If this story resonated with you, be sure to share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and tap the bell so you never miss another inspiring story. We'll be back soon with more tales that will challenge, uplift, and leave you reflecting long after they're over. Thank you for being a part of our Hopeful Horizon family. Until next time, stay strong, stay united, and always stand up for what's right.